All right, so yeah, this is the last kind of piece of content panel before our lunch. To give a little bit of framing for this particular panel, we did this also last year. The idea with this was to introduce ZK projects to the Cosmos ecosystem, but also kind of get a sense for folks working outside of Cosmos what it would take maybe to get into it. Maybe as a starting point, why don't we do a quick intro? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about the project?
Yeah, so I'm going first, I guess. I'm Florian. I do engineering for OF1 Labs. To give a bit of background, I guess, OF1 Labs is the company that incubated Mina protocol, and we remain still a very active core contributor to the protocol amongst other very capable companies. So Mina is one thing, and then we do have a second thing called Snarky.js, which is a very powerful TypeScript, sort of like ZK toolkit, SDK, which allows you to write Mina smart contracts, your knowledge smart contracts, and recursive circuits. So yeah.
Cool. And Daniel?
So I'm here representing Aleo, but I don't think I was necessarily outside of the Cosmos ecosystem. I used to lead the protocols team at Stakefish. And yeah, Aleo is you can call it a ZKL1. And yeah, fun fact, Matt Green was my advisor in grad school, and so I'd known about Aleo and its paper, zero knowledge execution, for a long time, so yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, a lot of the work I do is very close to it's very much in the ZK ecosystem, but you might be a good person to speak about this. You moved a little bit from, you had been very active in Cosmos. What's the change like when you step outside into ZK land?
I don't think I necessarily left Cosmos, but I did rage quit my last company. So. Oh. But I think, ZK. So I had actually been a part of, I guess, like the ZK. So I used to do bioinformatics research for a few years, and we use FHE a lot, and then we had to use ZK in that. But it's really exciting to see ZK find its sort of home in immutability, getting some on-chain verifiability, and the entire stack of composability and that blockchain offers. So.
Yeah, and maybe to give some description, like when we talk about the ZK ecosystem, it's sort of a collection of, sometimes it's like, it goes from like applications who want to build on ZK systems using privacy, all the way to like ZK L1s. And I think, a lot of the conversation last year, and something we want to continue, is this idea of like, how do these projects, either applications or the L1s, actually connect into the Cosmos ecosystem? Is there any benefit to doing that? I'm wondering if either of you have had thoughts on that, especially in prep for this panel.
Yeah, so it's a Cosmos panel, or like Cosmos event after all, so that's a very important thing. The Mina protocol, the Mina ecosystem is actively considering integration with other blockchains. For example, there's the Neil bridge, which is a trustless ZK bridge, which allows you to bridge the Mina state over to Ethereum. And that's just one bridge, and I guess potentially in the future there could also be more bridges to other ecosystems and chains, so that is one possibility.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Maybe another way to look at it is perhaps at the infrastructure service provider level, let's say like the validators. I think that validators have like this unique position to be able to see and support a lot of different blockchains. So Cosmos, obviously, and then Ethereum, Polkadot, Tezos, Solana, and then Aleo, for example. And I think validators can be a pretty effective bridge in both understanding the tech stacks of these different ecosystems, and then they're probably some of the best, perhaps, advisors in these blockchains in the ability to connect. So I think there's a lot that the L1s or even L2s have to learn from validators, and kind of seeing like, right, as an example, right, blockchains will rise and fall, some of them will disappear, but then the validators are mostly always there, they don't die. So.
Yeah, and you just talked about bridging to Ethereum, and that does seem to be a narrative that's grown in the last year versus, like literally since last year. But I mean, obviously, we're here in a place which promotes more like an IBC route. Do you think that sort of that look at Ethereum, is that almost like a bear market phenomenon and a look back? Is it sort of like, oh, we'll go to where it's still warm and not necessarily to where the future could be?
Yeah, so I guess my personal opinion is that ideally you would connect all the blockchains with each other. It doesn't matter if it's Ethereum or non-Ethereum. Certainly at the moment Ethereum is a very hot topic. That's where all the, I guess, capital is, where all the projects are. But I know that, for example, in the community there are people working on rollups in the Mina ecosystem, and they are exploring a sort of like layer 2 interoperability universe, which I can imagine would also then interact with Cosmos, look at potentially IBC, integrate with that. So I think there's lots of potential, but yeah, currently the hot topic is Ethereum, but I hope we can continue and then look at other blockchains, connect the overall blockchain world. So
maybe just to add on to that, it's interesting because when there are these like sort of connections or bridges to other ecosystems, sometimes it's like if we connect to Ethereum, then we hope that Ethereum devs will come onto Cosmos and then develop on our side, or maybe it goes vice versa. There's a pretty big like centralized exchange chain that we had been in Cosmos. Some of the Cosmos folks had been in conversation with, and like the bridging was great, right? We could do that, and it was just a matter of how we needed to upgrade certain things on their end. But then the majority of the conversation had always become like, oh, what do you want out of this bridging? It's like, well, we want your devs, right? We want like Cosmos devs to come over to build on your thing, and then maybe like, so even though like I think Ethereum is great, and we're getting a lot of this sort of connection point, but then there's like the flows are going in certain directions, and perhaps like that bridging is that we want to like suckle on the teat of Ethereum and then have all of this like extra liquidity come in, but which is not a bad idea, right? But then I think we eventually are like kumbaya in the beginning, and then when someone gets big enough, they want to be their own king.
Yeah, I just briefly want to add to that. I totally agree. I feel like most bridges are, even though they may be two-way, they are like mostly leading towards one side. So I think there's a lot of potential for a truly interoperable layer 2 world where like chains interact with each other, they benefit from each other, not only one central, I guess, chain, and just a very big, beautiful interoperability world.
I have a question that actually speaks to both projects in and outside of Cosmos, which is how do we get people building private applications? Is it like what, I mean, I think both of your projects have a version of that, but maybe even think past that. What do you think we need to get more people in? Because like that, like if you only have a small pool that's like moving in and off, like around bridges and still the same devs, you're fighting for a very small pie. So how do we grow the pie?
Yeah, so we have heard that in the previous talks. I think a very, very big important thing is user and developer experience, right? On the application level for the users, but also on the sort of like tooling levels for the developers. If we only have a very, I guess, like centralized minority that knows how to use these tools, then we will not have any more developers working with it. There's like an entry curve, a lot of learning you have to do to develop meaningful applications. So it's important to make that more accessible. Also on other chains, overall very accessible toolkits, easy to understand. So you don't have to be like a cryptographer or like only a couple of handful people that are already doing the same thing on 5 other chains and then just, I guess, copy-pasting that over. So like opening up the developer experience, developer pool, and then I think users will follow. They will use these applications if they are good, which they hopefully are. So.
Yeah, I also think that ZK itself is not just a Web3 thing. As I'd mentioned, right, we were using it when we were doing just bioinformatics genetic sequencing research and just sharing data between labs. I think that opens up this huge opportunity of like the Web 2 world that has an opportunity to use like this tech platform that is going to be on blockchain. And I think a really good example is I don't think ZK is necessarily like a speculative value proposition that blockchains are providing that have ZK functionality. It's more of like a useful value. Like, for example, right, Bitcoin, some people hate it, some people like it. And so like there's like that argument that, oh, Bitcoin's burning down the planet. A lot of people use the same sort of argument with AI, using massive GPU farms, and ZK is also using these massive GPU farms that eventually turn into FPGAs and ASICs. But then, right, like the argument, so for example, from the climate perspective, the aerospace industry uses emits 9 times more carbon emissions than Bitcoin, but then people don't like vilify it, right, as they do with Bitcoin, because there's value that people have. But with ZK, I would say that's more analogous to the aerospace industry in that the value is not necessarily speculative in that, right, just like number go up, but then people are using it, right? Like people are using it in consortiums. We were using it in like sharing data back and forth between labs in FHE. There's like a lot of gaming applications, et cetera, ZKML, like hiding some of them and allowing people to be more comfortable with sharing their data to train these models. I think the key point is that ZK allows the Web 2 world to interact with this technology platform that is native to the blockchain, and that will, I think, naturally allow, let's say, clients to come in or different industries to also use this because it's a necessary component. And that special part is basically the rise of like these sort of POW style ZK miners that are going to have this hardware that's now much more efficient because so much money has gone into the R&D to develop them because, right, the value associated with these tokens, a la like what happened with how Bitmain was able to get so much money into R&D because the Bitcoin value went up and they're able to develop more efficient and effective ASICs. So
I want to kind of take a little bit of a step back to something you said earlier, which was about the languages. And so I know each project, I don't think you mentioned actually Leo, the language that Aleo developed. So there is this fragmentation happening a little bit in the languages. The ZK DSLs, I think I know at least 12, maybe more. And almost every blockchain will have its own, every ZK-focused L1 will have its own language. Do you think this complicates it being adopted into other ecosystems? Do you think that if we had maybe even on our side a bit more of a standard, that would help to get these ZK tools into the other ones?
Yeah, no, I mean, certainly. There's, like you said, plenty of DSLs. Some are Rust-like, some are like TypeScript libraries, not necessarily DSL, like what Snarky.js is. And I guess it can be confusing at first for developers getting into that. There's a lot to choose from. Not all do the same thing. All require, I guess, slightly different, like a knowledge of certain implementation details. So I think it would certainly be beneficial to just overall improve the developer experience. And that certainly includes the, I guess, DSL tooling layer, how to write applications, how to work with them, right? I mean, if you develop an application on one chain, you want to make sure that however you can transfer it to other chains. You don't want to like rewrite everything every single day for every other potential use case. So I think it's certainly very beneficial to have a common ground. If it's not on the, I guess, DSL layer, then maybe on the, I guess, circuit representation layer, making sure that you can integrate with other stacks, other tool systems that includes testing and all that stuff. So
yeah, maybe I'm being naive, but I think that if there's a purpose and reason that people need to build these ZK programs, then you're going to have to just learn the language and suck it up. I don't think it's necessarily a problem that there's many different languages, but right, if there's a language that you need to learn to build a ZK program that you need to serve a particular application or purpose or initiative, then just learn it. Like just because it's like you have like this EVM compatible ZK stuff and it's like maybe it's not fit for purpose, but these DSLs exist for a reason because they are fit for purpose to build these ZK programs.
Maybe. I think what this makes me think of though is this idea, and I've talked about it a few times on different episodes, of like if you want it to be private in a multi-chain context, what you're describing is each side would have to like be written in a different language. And I think that leads to a lot of vulnerability. And actually, I kind of want to even bring this to IBC and maybe also other bridging, but like, you know, wouldn't it be kind of cool? Like, I think IBC is cool because of the fact that it's this thing that everyone can agree on. Like, wouldn't it be cool if there's also a ZK language that was sort of agreed upon within maybe this ecosystem or like more generally? I realize this is a big ZK topic.
Yeah, maybe, like you were saying, maybe it's a standard. Maybe it's like the bridging like the communication standard, which IBC, I guess, can implement.
So, no, yeah, definitely. I think there's probably two different types of standards that you can think of. One on the very high language layer, like having the exact same language, and then I guess something lower, which may be the circuit representation, or it may also be the communication between proof systems. So that's also a big part. We have only been talking about languages, and they then compile to their own, or like utilize their own proof system to do the proving of their proofs, but they can't really necessarily, I guess, interact with each other on the proof system. So if you have a proof on one chain, or like from one toolkit, then you have a proof on the other toolkit, what do? You can't do anything with it. So you essentially lost all the benefits of ZK if you have two different proofs. So I guess it would also be beneficial to look at the integration level of proof systems, and I'm not a cryptographer, so I don't know how to do that, but I think that would also be beneficial.
Or maybe I don't want to keep shilling like validators, but like, I mean, maybe it's like, right, because if there are these different ecosystems, a lot of these different ecosystems share the same validators, right? There's obviously like the usual suspects, but then maybe if they are the same, maybe they are this sort of like semi-trusted party that is able to communicate what needs to be communicated between those different ecosystems. But yeah.
Yeah, I think this is an idea that's still, at least for me, still kind of developing of how, and we had talked about it, like privacy on one chain, privacy on another chain, often coming in and out, like going over a bridge just automatically removes the privacy. We had talked about like, would there be private bridges possible? Could IBC be made private? Could it, if it incorporated some, and maybe it doesn't need the language so much on either side, but yeah, I do think there's a conversation here. I feel like we should have an IBC expert up on the stage to help us have that. But okay, another question, speaking of IBC, is do you ever imagine implementing IBC? Could Mina or Aleo be could you tap into this directly? Or are privacy systems built so differently that it would be hard to do?
Yeah, I guess we officially do not have any plans at the moment, but I can imagine that there are many community members building like compatibility layer 2s and all that. So I could certainly imagine that they take a look at that and at least take that as an ideal. Certainly build up on that and maybe integrate with it, but I guess we currently don't have plans in regards to that. We are currently, I guess, more focusing on the approach that I mentioned.
And just to clarify, what you were saying there is like you could have a roll-up on your system that would then have IBC integrated, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, potentially, right? And then that could also integrate with other roll-ups, other IBC-compatible chains, and then you could do that again and just keep going.
I think if there's a very specific purpose, then the bridge should be built. Like if there's just like a bridge to just have a bridge, then like as he was saying, like what direction is the things going? Yeah. But I mean, the ZK prover ecosystem, like these POW style ZK miners, they're free agents, right? They can provide their proving services to any chain, right? If the Cosmos ecosystem has the ability to kind of like use that, then right, you're just sharing infrastructure providers, and then therein is like the closeness that you can have between the two ecosystems.
That's actually, that whole world, like what that will actually look like, I've obviously heard a few times it described, but maybe we can just talk a little bit about it, which is you have the sort of transactions and the blockchain happening over here, but the proofs are potentially generated in a different setting, often by a validator-like entity. I know Aleo's built quite a lot around that.
Yeah, just for some context, Aleo is like this hybrid POS, POW style system where the POS is just the block building and consensus, and the POS stuff is the POW stuff is just like ZK mining, right? You do your off-chain proofs, and it's fascinating because you're getting to see these two different ecosystems, these infrastructure service provider ecosystems interact. So just coincidentally, right? Like when I was at Stakefish, our sister company was F2 Pool, which is like the largest Bitcoin mining pool at the time, and so I was quite familiar with both of the infrastructure providers on both sides. And so now we're beginning to see, because I'm helping set up the validator and prover ecosystem in Aleo, we're beginning to see like all the infrastructure providers kind of take a look in, and what I think is the most fascinating is that you're going to begin to see like these sort of hybrid organizations where you have both the validators take on like the ZK mining capabilities and the ZK miners take on the validator capabilities. But I mean, I've seen both sides, and I honestly think that it's much more difficult to take on the validator responsibilities. So I see more validators taking on, the plug and play ZK mining stuff. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see the ecosystems interact.
Yeah, Mina has something like that as well. Sorry, I blanked for a second.
Oh, no worries, no. We have something called snark workers, which are essentially like a prover infrastructure network. They are providing the proofs for transactions, right? So if you send a transaction, to give a bit more of background, you send a transaction, it's being proven using a snark worker, and then recursively, I guess, merged together with other proofs. And then you end up with one main proof, sort of like testifying the correctness of the entire chain. So we do have something called snark workers, which is that network of provers doing that proving. And then there's something called the snarked place, very snarky names, where you have some incentives, right? If you run a snark worker, you generate a proof and you get some mina for it. So.
Yeah, sounds good. Cool. Well, I've reached the end of my questions, but I do want to open the floor up for more questions, if anyone has any. So we can... Oh. Sorry, my bad.
Hello. At Penumbra, we do IBC permissionlessly to everywhere, but of course IBC is transparent. And one of the things that we've been trying to think about is how do you manage to do private IBC without having a problem of like if one of the counterparty chains misbehaves, then you leak. You could potentially leak you could get contamination from a counterparty chain because ordinarily in IBC you have like circuit breakers, but doing a circuit breaker with an encrypted or zero knowledge IBC connection seems tricky. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about like what directions those might go in.
We need Jack Zampolin to come.
Yeah, I feel like you're the expert on this.
I don't know if this is answering the question, but like Aleo has like this program registry that allows for differential privacy, and if there is a need for a certain counterparty on another ecosystem that does require some selective information, then that can be opened up. But
Okay, yeah, maybe we should chat offline about that. I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, you're certainly the expert on that.
Sorry, it's a super niche question.
It's a great question, and it's like an important question to actually talk about. That's what I think I was trying to hint at, that vision. But I think maybe, I don't know if we are the right people.
I feel like we need to solve this problem in some kind of way, whether it's through like homomorphic encryption or MPC or something, so that we can like contain malicious counterparty chains in order to have like real private IBC that works properly.
This is a question, actually, I'm going to ask you this, but like have you, and this is maybe the counter IBC argument, would it be easier, better do you have more flexibility if you actually do a bespoke bridge that uses one of these techniques? Is it harder to try to shoehorn it into an IBC setting?
I think probably the thing that we're talking about would not be IBC. It would be another inter-blockchain communication protocol.
Okay.
But I don't think it would look like the protocol that already exists.
So it is different, yeah.
Yeah, and then you have these problems of like if every chain has its own shielded pool with its own proving architecture, then how do you do proofs that like translate between like you're using Plonk, I'm using Groth16 or whatever. Like what do you do? I don't know.
Slap a standard on it. And
Try to get a standard.
And then you have 16 standards instead.
I mean, I think IBC as a standard for this ecosystem is incredible, given how early it was thought up, and I think like in the ZK space, it's not just ZK DSLs, it's proving systems, it's like even like circuit size techniques within a proving system, because you have things like Plonk, but then you have like variations on Plonk.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, Halo 2 as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, any other questions? Oh, maybe one more? Right there?
Hey, this is a significantly more basic question. So, like, you mentioned about talking about kind of like Bitcoin, and you talked about aerospace, and kind of just like how there's some like the ways that ZKs actually is quite useful for getting end customers outside of Web3. I wondered, like, what do you think are the most like suitable end customers for ZK, like, and how do we approach those better?
So I think when you say customers, I think the way we tend to talk about it is like use cases. So like one big one would be like ID, ZK ID, ZK ML. So this is where using a blockchain is sometimes really useful for immutability and consistency. But I think that at least in the ZK-ML case, there's already examples where you're using ZK to prove that something is accurately done within a modeling training and stuff like that, like making sure that the data that was fed was correct. That doesn't really require a blockchain anywhere. That's just using ZKPs. So maybe, yeah, to speak on that, zero-knowledge proof technology started in the late 80s. And it was sort of theoretical, kind of under the radar. People did try to use it for passwords, I think in the early 2000s. But what happened was like you melded it with blockchain, all of a sudden all this like excitement, maybe financial incentive, a lot of money poured in, libraries got built, mindshare was grown. And so it's grown, like all the ZKP systems that we know today, a lot of them were developed in the last 5 years. The common proving systems, the Snark, the Plonk, the Snarks actually, the Snarks, the Plonk, the Novas, but yeah, like what's funny is like it accelerated through blockchain, and now because these systems are so good, you can start to see them spilling out into these other realms. Sometimes tied still back to a blockchain, sometimes not. But yeah, I'm very excited to see where this is going. Like the topic of ZK outside of blockchain is like fascinating and not super well spec'd out yet. The only one the one I can point to right off the bat is this like machine learning, like showing that the data was correct. I don't know if you guys have other examples.
Learning, like that stuff, and I do think that blockchains, or like the cryptocurrencies and their associated blockchains. Particular use case here is that you have like this speculation, and then the value increases, and then you're able to get a lot more money into the R&D that goes into developing more efficient and effective ZK hardware. Because if the end goal is this like ZK ASIC, or some people are calling like ZPUs or something like that, then you have like this what was not possible in the 80s or the early 2000s. We now have more accessible and potentially even commoditized to serving whatever different use cases there are. Bitcoin is, I think, the perfect example, right? We were able to just do it on like crappy hardware. Obviously, the difficulty went up, but then we have very fine-tuned, efficient, and effective hardware that exists now and not later because Bitcoin's value went up and they were able to use that money to support it. So. Yeah.
Yeah, just very quickly, just to generalize that, I think there's probably a lot of potential in the Web2 world when it comes to proof of model. So, for example, CK learning, that's a proof of model. How do I know that the thing you're giving me is like truly that awesome AI thing, and you didn't do it yourself? That would be awful. Or maybe things like, how do I know that you're really offering me like the best price on like a flight, website comparison? How do I make sure that you're not artificially pushing the price for some reason potentially? Or maybe peer-to-peer interactions with users. How do I know that you are who you are? That could be chats, potentially even games, if the technology is advanced enough. So.
Yeah, I think that the use cases have been expanding in the ways of using these things, and I think there's a lot of uncharted territory. So there's actually a lot of space for creativity and trying to use them in certain cases, seeing if it works. I do want to just mention like some other cryptography that also is starting to be like, or has been for a while, but tied in with ZK. So sometimes people use the term ZK as this blanket term for advanced cryptography. So you have things like fully homomorphic encryption or multi-party computation. So what we are seeing more and more is like these systems trying to incorporate pieces of those as well, maybe combining them, and there's going to be some very powerful, interesting things that come out of it, I think. I think it's fair to predict that. All right, cool. Thank you so much for staying for this morning session. We're going to break for lunch. And thank you to our panelists for the, external privacy into Cosmos panel.
Yeah, thank you.